There it is. That's what I was looking for. All righty. Thank you very much for everyone for joining. My name is Edward Kranz. I am a bookbinder out of Erie, Pennsylvania. I started bookbinding in 2012, roughly. Back then, there was some material online. I ended up doing a lot of my learning from, videos from the Bookbinders Workshop, which would be Michael L. Chrisman, and we'll revisit that name here in a minute. I also picked up a lot of books, Bernard Middleton. I have a couple of his books and various other things. So I spent the better part of the next decade destroying a lot of paper material, learning what works and what doesn't work, trial and error. I was very much the amateur. And at that time, I was working for the Boeing company. I was a grade 6 mechanic on the 787 program. I worked my way up and I became an analyst before I left there. Boeing, in its infinite wisdom, laid me off. They do that a lot, if you remember history. I came back to Erie with my family to kind of mentally and financially regroup. I took a job at a plastic company over in Mill Creek. Then COVID hit. They laid me off. And so I started doing my bookbinding a lot more full time. And then they called me up and said, "Hey, we're not going to bring you back." Like, oh, that's awesome. And yeah, I just really didn't feel like applying for a job again. I did. I just didn't want to. So yeah, we'll leave it alone. So I started doing the bookbinding full time. So that's what I do. I do a lot of Bible restoration. Folks around here love their old late 18th to early 20th century Bibles. So that's like the lion's share of my work. I do a lot of bespoke work. I've done a couple projects, limited edition prints. I recently did a print or a binding for Sun Top Editions. Kind of an infamous story, but yeah, so that's a little background on me. I owned a construction company out of high school, traveled the country for about a decade, moved out to Seattle where I met my wife, went to design school, had a design company, worked in-house, worked freelance, and that led me to the Boeing company, which leads me to here because I've already filled in that gap. So that's me. Does anyone want to introduce themselves?
I'll go next. My name is Chris Rosar. I live in Guelph, Ontario. I am retired and have been for the last 13 years, and there's no life like it. I got into bookbinding through a friend of mine, and I've been doing it as a leisure activity. I like the construction of books, but I'm not too fancy. I live in a condo, so I'm very mindful that I don't have my own workspace and, can't just leave all my stuff out. So I have a nice little workstation. I've done a few courses online and in person, one of which was the Secret Belgian Binding. And so I have done a few of them and I enjoy it. I think it's an interesting structure. My idea for getting into doing books was I'm trained as a photographer, and I thought, oh, I'll make a book of my photographs, a one-of-a-kind type thing. And I haven't done it yet, but that'll happen. I just have to look for image transfer type of methods. Yeah, this is very much just enjoying the process. So I look forward to today's recap, see what you do differently from where I took it. Okay, great.
It'll be interesting to see. So when you were doing Secret Belgian bindings, did you use the traditional method where you sewed directly to the threads, or did you use the Guage method where you kind of did a protective wrap on the threads and then?
No, I put the signatures directly onto the threads. Yeah, I've looked
Excellent.
at it, I've looked at it online through the DAS bookbinding, and
Get Darren over, yeah, in Australia.
yeah,
Great.
I think he does both, but it's kind of like the signatures are embedded into another channel. Is that correct?
So
We'll just do it. Yeah.
we're gonna cover it. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna sew what would be, the single pass type of secret Belgian binding, and we're going to sew the traditional method, and it'll be directly to the threads, and then we will take a look at the Angoy. Now, if you'd prefer, I can sew. We can. I only want to sew one because of the amount of time it takes. So if you want me to sew the traditional method, we will. Or if you want me to sew the Angoy method, which I didn't realize how much I'd appreciate it more than sewing on the threads. I actually think this is the way to go. So maybe we'll sew this. Um, and honestly, it's not that much different. It's just instead of picking your sewing station and sewing to a single thread, you're creating these sewing stations that are wider, almost like sewing on tapes. And you basically go behind. Not sure how well you can see that. I have an overhead camera, so when we're actually working it, you can see the process a little bit better. And then once we're done with this, I'm going to take the edited version uh, and put it online for you guys. And so if I'm doing table work, what I'll do is, because I can't manipulate the focal length as I'm working, but what I'll do is I'll zoom in like 1.5 times so it's more focused on the actual hand work. And then you can go back and refer to it. And I'll send you it'll be an unlisted link on YouTube. The only people that have access to it are the people who are in this course, and then my paying tier levels on Patreon, they'll have access to it. Okay, so, and remind me, you're Chris or Kristen?
Chris.
Chris, okay. The screen is far enough away that without my glasses, I can't read it. So, all right, pleasure to meet you, Chris. Sarah, you want to say hi?
Hi there, I'm Sarah. I live just around the block from you, Chris, over in Cambridge. So a whole bunch of Canadians on the chat. I'm new to bookbinding. I've done, oh gosh, under 10 books. And honestly, I'm pretty much technique driven at the moment, just trying to understand structure and form and kind of get a feel for everything to figure out where my groove and my niche are. And like Chris, it's a hobby. And yeah, very excited to learn from you.
Right on. All right, good to meet you, Sarah. And Deborah.
My name's Debbie Marriott, and I live in Barefoot Bay, Florida. I'm an artist, and I've been playing with making art type books with Coptic stitch. So I wanted to learn other binding methods.
All right. Yeah, we just had a Coptic session last week. Sorry you missed that one. I don't know, maybe we'll arrange for you to get a peek at that link.
Well, I took a class from Sharon Payne Bolton
Okay.
to learn how to do the Coptic stitch. And I do little small art books like she does.
Gotcha.
And
Okay.
I sell them in a local gallery.
Very cool.
That's it.
That's it. Okay, Debbie, great to meet you. So I think at this point we're going to jump into this. So I'm kind of worried because right now I've got Debbie on the screen. All of your mics are muted. But usually when I start talking, I pop up. Am I the primary image on your screens?
Yes, you are. You're good.
Okay. I'm just wondering what the system is recording. Okay, well, not much I can do about it right now. I wonder, well, let me take a look real quick at. I'm kind of when I was with Boeing, we worked a lot with Zoom, but it's changed. And so I'm just kind of wondering why it's not switching. That is bizarre. Okay. Well, let's move forward. Worst case scenario is I have to record an independent video of the process and post it. These are what I need. I can see. Generally, as a rule, I don't allow beverages on my workbench, but I'm also not a morning person, and so that's necessary. All right, so we're going to cover some basic tools that you need, things that you cannot get away with not having. You're going to want to have some sort of razor sharp cutting utensil, whether this is a standard knife from the hardware store with changeable blades. They snap off to sharpen. X-Acto, or if you use scalpels, I have a few scalpels that I kind of like. So you're going to need something to cut with. And of course, every bookbinder needs his Bonefolder friend. And you're going to need some pokey things, some form of awls. And let's see, what's another must? Scissors of sorts. I got little guys here. I don't know why I picked the smallest ones I had. Not absolutely necessary, but we're going to be using dividers, and we'll get into that. I also have a Japanese screw punch to complement my other pokey devices. Love these things. I highly recommend spending the extra money and getting a real one. If you end up with one, an off-brand one, like I think this was like $89, and it came with all the tips. You can get them for 25 or 30. They break and they're crap. I'm sorry. So that's just my recommendation. Writing implements of destruction, pen, pencils, whatever you prefer. You're going to need some glue brushes. We're going to take a look at a variation where you have your standard stitch, and then I don't know what they call this, but I like this. I prefer this. It's just a variation of the Secret Belgian or the Crisscross Binding, and essentially it's making, in my case, there was like 6 or 7 passes instead of the one, and it creates this really pretty banded design, and I just love it. Let's see. You're going to need something to measure with. I recommend a metal scale or ruler, if that's what you call it. Something very thin. This is a spatula, excuse me, or micro spatula. I'm not sure that qualifies as micro yet. And I use this to, when we go to put these guards, I use this to kind of lift the string so everything, the thread, so everything fits underneath it. These are handy dandy if you're not good at cutting 45s. I picked these up from Bookbinding. Actually, they were a present from my mom. She saw them and thought they were clever, and I thought it was a joke, and I started using them. And I mean, it saves me a couple seconds, but it's much nicer. I get perfect corners every time. And then, of course, you're going to need some threads. I'm going to use a couple different types of thread. This is a number 18 3-ply, and it's heavier than what I'm going to sew with, which is a 35 3-ply. I use the heavier cord to make the cover with, and we'll get into the difference between a cover and a case. But I like this because you can see it better. It's just aesthetically, it's a much better thing. And then, of course, if you need notes, because we're going to take measurements, something to write on. You'll also want a weight. I use these antique irons. When I teach workshops, I'll wrap just regular $2 bricks and I'll hand them out to the class. And I'll give them a couple each. Inexpensive alternative to a book press. Now, if you have a stack of heavy books, they make the ultimate book press. They're like a little too on the nose, maybe. So I have a couple small standing presses. This one's from Callis. It works, and I don't know that it was worth what I paid for it, but I'm not going to go into that rant. I have a Dryad Lessiter, and then I've got a couple large iron presses in the back room. So you'll need something heavy, book press or books to press or weights, something along those lines. And then if you're like me and can't see up close, you're going to need your glasses. Some tape will be handy. This is standard painter's tape. And I recommend, depending on the material, this case is made with Bugra, I think it's 130 GSM paper. And it's a lovely paper, but it's very, you put tape on it, the tape's going to pull it apart. Very fibrous and loose. So I recommend putting this on like your pants and letting some of the tack come off of it before you use it on a really good paper. Okay, so, and a cutting mat. So we got a cutting mat. I think, and some form of punching cradle. So I'm really big on my demonstrations, my workshop, showing people things that you can use that you might just have laying around. You don't have to go out and spend money on a punching cradle. This is the local telephone directory, and since I don't use it for its proper use, I'll just open it up and I use the inset of the pages, the gutter, as my punching cradle, which we'll show. Or you can make them. There's different designs online, or you can go buy one. That's okay. That's what we're going to be using. So it's interesting. One of you mentioned DOS bookbinding. I think his name's Darren, and he talks about this particular style. He doesn't consider this a case. He considers it's a cover, because you make this and you sew to it versus making your text block and then you attach the case. I struggle to see the significant difference. I think at that point we're splitting hairs, but I just wanted to note that this particular style of binding is pretty case cover driven. So there's that. So first thing we're going to do is, because to make your case, your cover, you need to know how big your text block is going to be. The paper that I am using is a 130 GSM Flurry, 100% cotton rag, and it's from a company called Boxcar Press. And I love the feel of this paper. It's lovely to touch, and it's a decent weight. You can write on it; it doesn't bleed through, and it makes incredible books. And if you just check out Boxcar Press, they have this made specifically for them, and they sell it in large sheets. And this is half a sheet. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and fold this into signatures. Let's see if my corners line up. And let's see, let's switch over. You guys all know about grain direction? Okay, I can't see Debbie nodding, but grain direction with this particular book, while I'm not going to say that grain direction isn't important, it's not critical for this book to work because you don't really introduce the moisture to the spine and it doesn't cause that rippling. The only thing you have to worry about your grain direction is if your paper doesn't want to fold nicely. When I send out the link to the video, I'll also include notes on the materials that I use. You don't have to use these materials. Everything here is subjective. I use different papers in my projects depending on the project. I have a Cougar natural that I like to use, Mohawk, extra fine. Then I've got watercolor papers that I love. It's just for journals and this type of blank book. I think this paper is really good. In this case, because I picked 8 signatures. I find that this particular type of binding has a certain limit to the spine height to your cover ratio, and I'll show you here what I'm talking about. And I think this is more of a personal preference. Okay, so we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Take these, split them in half, flip half of it over. I'm going to throw them in this press real quick.
Can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
How many pages in the signatures each?
Oh, okay, yes. I did not say that. So each signature is made up of 4 folios. So 16 pages total for each. But again, that comes down to preference. You can have as many signatures as you want, and you can, depending on your paper, I think that would drive the number of folios per signature. If you have a thicker watercolor paper, maybe you might want only 2. Okay, I'm going to let that press for a minute. Now, ideally, I would make several books at a time. I'd put the signatures in the press. I'd leave it overnight. I don't think we have time for that. So, while that's pressing, so I like, and again, personal preference, I like the thickness to cover ratio. And it's not just an aesthetic thing. When you open this up, there's a certain point, like these guys are thicker. Now they're smaller. I think if this book were larger, the thickness of the spine wouldn't bother me as much. And I don't know why it bothers me, but it still opens up. It still functions the way it's supposed to. Oh, except that. That's interesting. I didn't notice that about that. So with this particular style, the single pass, really easy to put the cover underneath and let it lay flat. And this doesn't do it. Interesting. Is this one? Yeah, see the thickness I think is really messing with it. So how wide is this? I want to say it's 2 centimeters. Yeah, it's just under 2 centimeters. I think it's sitting at 18 millimeters. So folks up in Canada, you may appreciate this. I'm probably one of 8 Americans in the country that you actually use metric. Drives me nuts because it makes sense. And even when I was working as an airplane mechanic, while we didn't have metric, all of my scales were broken down into tenths. So I still worked in a base 10 system. But yeah, I don't understand why people just don't do that. So for my friend down in Florida, let's see, 18 millimeters is, I'm going to call it about 3/4 of an inch. I don't know what the exact conversion is, but it's in that neighborhood. So I think anything more than 2.5 centimeters, and I would probably say anything more than 2 centimeters is probably pushing it for this particular structure. Obviously, you can go thicker. Let's see what this is. This is almost 3. So this is 19. It was probably meant to be 3. It's yeah. So we'll just call that 3 centimeters. And so let's see, what's 3 centimeters? So that'd be about just under 1.25 inches in old money. So yeah, I would definitely be aware of how thick you're making your spine if you want the ability to do that. And when yeah, so this one here, I would say we test this one, but it's not sewn yet. It's just there to show off the banding. Okay, so you think this is simulated overnight enough? Let's back out. Oh yeah, that's at least 20 hours right there. Okay. All right. So if this were printed, you'd have your orientation. My book is completely blank, so I'm not going to pay attention to that. But what I am going to do is measure this. And this is coming out to 228, which is, yep, I already have notes. So it's 228 high and 152, that's 152.5, 152 millimeters wide. That's interesting. My notes say 156. So the question is, what's wrong? My notes or me? No, I would say it's 153. So we're gonna say the height is 234 and my width is 156. Okay, so now we now know how big the text block is. So to make the case, you have to determine how big you want your squares. So the squares, and I'm assuming you guys already know, the squares is the amount of material of the board that overhangs the text block. It's the protective barrier between the text block and the rest of the world. In this particular case, I'm going to say I want 3" at the head and tail. And the reason I picked 3" is because I'm using thicker board than I normally would. It's it's almost 3 mil. It's just under 3 mil. I just derailed my thought. So 3 and 3. So I'm going to add 6 to that. And no. I'm going to add 2 to the top and the bottom. And I'm going to add 3 to the foredge. 6, 7, 8, 9, 5, 159, 4, 5, 6, 3. So when I go cut my boards, I'm going to cut my boards 236 by 159. And that'll give me, no. I'm messing up. I am so sorry. The 2 millimeters should actually be 4, 2 at the top, head, 2 at the tail. So there we go. So the height and the width of the text block. And so this is going to be the height and the width of the boards. So what we're going to do, set this aside for now. So Davey binder board. And wanted to check the grain direction, sure that I didn't get off. All right, so we said our width is going to be 159. Probably just going to round that up and call it 160. Do stop. Hi, this is Freya. Because no Zoom meeting is complete without a cat. There are 3 cats here. And 1 German Shepherd, which you'll probably hear shortly as soon as the mailman drops something off. Really? It's funny doing it this way. When I first started off, I did everything by hand like this. And then I bought a board shear. There was a gentleman who, he was the head conservator at Cornell. No. Yeah, head conservator at Cornell. And he was retiring. And I got most of his bindery, which was a godsend because that was almost at the exact time that I got laid off and decided I wanted to do this professionally. And I got the board shear. It's an old turn of the 19th century. It's beautiful. It's got a wooden trough built into it. And hey, can you not do that? Hey, no. And this is why I can't have glasses on the bench. Why can't? So yeah, so I got that board shear, and my gosh, you set it and it just goes through these boards like butter. Everything's perfectly crisp and square. There's no, slight angularity. Loved it. All right, so we cut the width, right? Yes, now we're gonna do the height. Sure everything's squared up. Like this better. So I already know these are square. This side is not. I can see, you can't see. These guys are squared up. This here is not. That's okay, because we're going to cut that off. And so our height is 238. I like making my marks with the blade, even though it's harder to see. I found that your pencil mark can be thick enough to throw you off by a millimeter in either direction. And so if you cut on one side, on one end, and then the other side on the other, you end up with this really skewed piece. Okay. So take peel away. So I'm not happy with my foredge. It seems a little excessive. So yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take a millimeter or so off of them and bring that under control. I do a lot of stuff by eye. Um, if you're more comfortable measuring, I highly recommend that. We were doing construction, it would drive my dad nuts because I would do all this work by eye and almost never pick up my tape measure, but it would almost always come out right. See if my bragging holds up. Still a little excessive. Okay, I know I'm killing some time here, but take just a little bit more off. Okay, much happier with that. All right, so there are my squares. Okay, so we now have all the signatures. We have our boards. Last piece we need to cut boards is going to be the spine. When you go to do the spine, you want to kind of take into consideration the thickness of your thread because you're going to get some swell, but you want to compact that a little bit because you don't want the wedge of cheese. And you know, had I pressed this overnight, now this paper is kind of on the heavier side as far as like a text weight paper, but so I'm going to give it a little bit of pressure and get my measurement. So what I want to do is measure in between the boards. I call that 12 millimeters. Let's see if down here is about the same. Yeah, I'm gonna call that 12 millimeters. That seems really thin. That's because it was 12 millimeters. 18. All right. The light over here is throwing a shadow, making it hard to see the lines. Okay, well, it's not going to sit in there like that. I just wanted to check and make sure that that fit well. All right, I'm pretty happy with that. So if you didn't follow it, you want your width of your spine to be between the boards. You want it to be the width of your text block. All right, the next step, we're going to move on to covering the boards. I've got a piece of Bugra paper. I picked this up at Talus. Um, it's a really great paper. I mean, if you're doing printing or bookbinding, it makes great covers. I find that if your book is going to see a lot of shelf wear, this might not be the best paper to use because in and out, it's like I said, it's fibrous and you might have some problems with it. But uh, I love it. It makes great end papers, and I do cover books with it. So what I'm going to do. I'll lay this out. I'm going to use this, my new spine, And I'm going to use it for the turn-ins to kind of gauge their thickness. I've got another one right here. Okay. I have everything on the bench but glue. Give me 1 second. I'm going to go over to that bench and grab my jar. All right, here we go. Jar of glue. So what I'm using is it's PVA, nothing special about it. You can use PVA, you can use paste, whatever your adhesive of choice is here. All right, because of the way I'm doing this, normally you want to glue out the thinner material, but I'm just going to glue these down. So I'm going to cheat and I'm going to glue out my board. But the best practice is you glue out the thinner material. I highly recommend making yourself a set of just predetermined spacers for turn-ins. No, that's not what I wanted to do. I'm so sorry. I just made a mess. So I actually needed twice that. So what I wanted to do is I wanted a spacer here for this one, and then a spacer here for this one. Not a big deal. So I need to do the same thing where I'm going to put 2 spacers because I want one for the board cover and I want one for the spine. I'm just going to use my spacer for my turn-in. Your turn-in should be probably close to 12 to 20 millimeters. I'm using the 18 millimeter spines because it seemed like a decent number. All right. So normally what I would do at this point, these would get put into the press for a little nip. Right. Got this little guy. And now we wait. All right. We're going to pretend it was in there for 20 minutes or so. We'll use a little corner cutter. So you want your corner to be away from the corner of the board 1.5 times the thickness. So if you have a 2 mil board, you're going to want the space between the corner and the edge of your 45-degree angle to be 3 millimeters. Reason for that is when you do your turn-ins and you pinch that corner, which we'll do in a minute, it allows enough material to cover, but not enough material to bind up or bulk in, make. I'm forgetting my words right. You want as little bulk there as possible, and you want a nice clean corner. And that ratio of 1.5 times for the distance is a good number for that. And again, when I put this video on the link, I will zoom in so this is a lot closer. Okay. So the next step, we need another piece of paper. All right, I usually have blue paper here for a second. So give me One moment to go grab some blue paper. I finally found a use for all that recycling they keep delivering in the mail. We're ready to turn ins next. You don't have to glue them all out at once. So I was talking about pinching. I'm not sure how well this will focus. You can see there's a little pocket right there. And that's what you want, just a little bit of a pocket, because what you want to do is use your fingernails or another device. You want to push that around like that. And I usually just use a fingernail, does the same thing. You end up with something that looks a little bit more like that. That way, a nice clean corner. And there's your turn-ins. So I'm going to rinse and repeat. Too much glue there. If you have any issues with your corners, and this is something I learned when working leather, is now is the time to work it because all the material is wet. And so if things aren't perfectly square or lined up, now is the time to fix it. So you can tap, make sure everything's square. I find this comes about more with leather than paper. But practice, good practice. Okay, there's 2 boards. I'm gonna put them face. And final piece to glue out will be spine. A little too much paste on this or glue. The nice thing about using the spine piece as the gauge for how much your turn-in is between the thickness of the spine, it's going to make it about the right size. You want your turn-in to be a little bit less than the width. That'll give you a nice, even covering. So when you do that, solid all the way. Itty bitty little turn-ins. Okay. You now have covered case. So the next step is we need to mark up the case and put the holes in it. So what we're going to do is up the glue. So we already measured it. We know that the height of the board is 234. So we are going to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 gives us 10 spaces. So we are going to divide 234 by 10, which will give us 23.4, right? So each space should be 23.4. Where did my ruler go? All right. The first thing that I want to do is determine how far I want to come in. I'm going to pick 2 centimeters because that's what this one is. We're going to try and pretty much duplicate this. You are not restricted to 2 centimeters. If you want to make it 3 or 1, that is up to you. You can make them varying. You can have a pattern of 1 centimeter, 3 centimeter, however you want it. So all I did was put a line on the board at 2 centimeters in. So for those who speak metric on a regular basis, when you're using small measurements, would you commonly say 2 centimeters or would you call it 20 millimeters? What would be the more common way of calling
Centimeters
that
is
out?
generally the one that I use. Millimeters if I'm being very minutia, but centimeters is what I tend to work in.
Agreed.
Gotcha. Okay, now I can see them. So we've now marked both boards. So this is where the dividers come in handy. You can measure 9 sets of holes, and that's great. Or you can just take your divider, set it at 23. Let's see, that's it, 24. Let's pull this in a hair. My eyes are playing tricks with me with the lines. Okay, I think that's 23. Okay. And so what I'd end up doing is I would set on the edge and I'd make my first mark. And I'd press a little hard because I want to make sure that that hole is seeable. And I would just walk down this line, pressing the point into the board. That's going to give me my 9, for lack of a better term, I'm going to call it a sewing station, even though it's not on the text block. And theoretically, this should come out. That's close, not quite. So for this one, since the head and tail are going to be slightly different, I'm gonna have to pay attention to my text block when I poke it. I punch those holes. But this is a lot easier than measuring out that 20, what did I say, 23.4. This is a little punch that I used to use when I worked on the aircraft. When I was going to drill holes, it's a spring-loaded punch, and you just kind of line it up with your hole, press down, and this spring, it gives me a bigger hole. So you can see these ones versus these ones. Not a necessary step. If you're going to punch your holes with an awl, this is a good way of starting that. It gives you a definite solid starting point. Sorry, I have to pause for station identification. Okay. At this point, you can, if you have a board or something like that, you can use an awl to drive the hole through. In my case, I'm going to use the Japanese screw punch, which I was using yesterday to make up this guy, so I can show it to you. And it jammed up. Thought I broke it. Turns out they need lubrication every once in a while. Did find that if you're going through a thicker board, you're pumping it like this, at a certain point, it's going to start jamming up and it'll jump. If you're working on a finished surface, like if you're doing this from the outside of the case, it can jump and put a little mark in your work. And like me, that'll kind of ruin your day a little bit. Get upset at stupid stuff. So before I blow through and get a little board, don't damage my mat. Starting to come through. Pull my tip out. And there are lots of options. I mean, you can put eyelets. I know some people like eyelets on their notebook. Is it a really finished look? I'm getting a little bit of, I'm gonna have to wash my fingers here in a minute because it'll mess up my case. Top two. So there's the first board with its holes in it. I'm gonna go ahead and finish the second one. Okay, yeah, see, and I got a little bit of debris on there. I'll have to clean off later. All right, so there's the two boards punched. And whoa. Give me a second. I'm going to clean off my fingers before I get more nastiness over this stuff. I'll be right back. Okay, I usually have a rag on the bench, a damp one. Okay. How's everyone doing so far? Do you need a break? Are you doing good? Any questions?
Yeah, do you have to do 9 holes? I have one here.
No.
I've done 8. It's you can, if you do, well, you've done
There-
3 on that one, so, and it's
There's
quite a,
three.
yeah. So is there any disadvantage to having fewer, or is it all right?
I think that's an aesthetic. I wouldn't have fewer than 3, and I would go in multiples of 3, and I'll show you why in a minute.
Okay.
But I don't think it matters. If you have at least 3, I think you're fine. When There we go. So with this particular one, it has 9 holes, or yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, yeah, 9 holes, and that gives me 4 sewing stations on the inside with the protective wrap in sets of 2, and it leaves the one in the middle. I think when you're designing and laying out your book, if you keep this kind of structure in mind, Does it matter that I have a center one? Probably not. So could I have used 8? Probably. And I space these evenly. You can do this any way you want. Like you can have 2 here, 2 here, and 2 here. Or, you can have 2 or 3 close together, a couple far. This is an aesthetic thing at that point. I mean, as long as you have enough to hold it together, I think you're fine. I don't think there's a rule book for that. That's where you get to have fun and experiment with it. Okay. Any other questions? That was a good one, though. Let's see. So I have all right, we're going to move forward with this. So the next step is putting the case together. It's weird because I want to say sewing it together, but I mean, is it really? Daryl on DOS Bookbinding now really has me questioning that in different aspects of this. Is am I sewing the case together, or am I just combining it? Is it a case or is it a cover? So what I'm going to do is, because I know this particular paper is sensitive to tape, I'm just taking a little bit of the tack off by putting on fabric. And then, because it's so thick, I'm going to split it in half. But if you already have like 1 inch or whatever size tape, so what you want to do is you're going to lay your case out. You can't see what I'm. There we go. You want to lay your case out so your gaps are just about a needle width. So 1 or 2 millimeters. You don't want a thick gap. So I just kind of eyeball it. If the needle's a little snug, I think that's better than loose. And once you get everything lined up, you're going to put some tape across there. Make sure everything's even. And put some tape across here. Flip the whole thing over. See, this looks a little tight to me here. There we go. All right, and I'm going to bring my tape around. Now, is this absolutely necessary? No. I guarantee you it'll make your life easier. Trying to hold these 3 pieces while you're trying to sew and zigzag it, you don't want to do that. All right. So this is the thread I'm using. It's 100% flax linen, 18 gauge 3-ply. It's a pretty heavy. I don't know if you can see how we can see that. It's a pretty heavy thread. I don't necessarily, I wouldn't use this for sewing a book in a traditional sense, because it'll give you quite a bit of swell. But because I'm using this as an aesthetic aspect of the case, I'm going to use the heavier. I wouldn't mind having even heavier than this thread. But that's personal preference. All I'm doing is trying to get some of the twist out of this.
Did you you did it a length of your arm twice? How far? The length of the thread.
So the length of this thread was roughly 2.5, almost 3 lengths of my arm. Okay, it was 3 lengths, a little bit more. This is probably excessive. I just don't want to run out in the middle. The way this is set up, it probably will use 2 lengths of my arm. But I prefer to have a little bit extra because, like I said, I don't want to run out in the middle of this and have to do a weaver's knot. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to come in from the outside. No, we're not. We're going to go out from the inside. We'll leave ourselves a nice, healthy tail. And we're going to use a little piece of tape to hold that in place. And I'm just going to press it down. I'm not going to keep it away from that Bugra. Okay. This is where the fun starts. All right, so we went out from the inside, and now we're going to come in from the first seam. See how many things I can catch. Okay. We went out from the inside, we came in. That's what you're seeing. And we're going to go around that spine piece. And I'm just going to do both at the same time. I'm going to come back in. That's what you're seeing from the outside. And this is what you're seeing from the inside. So in, around, out. We're now going to go back. By going back in through the spine. And back in. So what this is going to do is put your line across the spine piece on the outside, like that. And at this point, I'm going to make sure everybody's nice and snug. You don't want it so snug that you're crimping your tape, but you're going to tie this off now. So I'm going to take my little helper here, and it's going to take half my board with it. Arg. I should have. This is some really, it's supposed to be painter's tape, and it'll take everything with it. All right. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to do a nice little knot. I'm going to keep it as close to that hole as possible. Everybody's still snug. Okay. And that is how you start it. Leave about an inch. So if you go back and forth. Okay. So from there, you're going to go and repeat the same pattern. You're going to go out from the inside. You're going to come back in. What that gives you, you start your little chevrons. So the important thing is you're going to be working down. I would never want to go on top of this with my needle and go through. I always want to go under the previous section. So I'm going to go under both those threads. And back up through. Angle my thread. I'm moving too fast. Okay, that is one pass. That gives you that formation. So now what we do is we're going to come down to the next hole, and we're going to do pretty much just the opposite. Instead of starting here and going through, we're going to start here. We're going to go back out. And for the next 10-15 minutes, you're going to do the back and forth of this exact same pattern, alternating sides. Now, I want you to keep in mind how long it takes me to do this, which I just told you would be about 10-15 minutes, depending on how I'm working. This will literally take you 6 or 7 times that. So to get your bands like this nice and thick, if this takes me 10 minutes, this is going to take me about an hour. So there's a significant jump in time. Now, I mean, it depends on how you're watching, how fast you're working. Like, I'll sit down and watch a program to relax, and I'll sit and sew one of these over the course of a program. So for the next,
When you do the
yeah.
six, when you do the bulkier one with the 6 threads, or how many that you go, do you do each section at once, or do you go down and then go all the way down and then back up, or how does that work? Or do you do
Okay,
6?
so what I would do is to get your, so you know how I said this was one pass?
Yeah.
Instead of dropping down,
Okay.
I would do this 6 times.
Okay.
Once I got done with the 6th pass, or and it really depends on, this thing,
That's almost a centimeter.
the hole that I put in there is about 1/2 centimeter.
Okay.
And so that would give me about 6 passes. I probably could have put, trying to count how many I actually did. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so this is 7 passes. I probably could have put an 8th one in there and made these tighter. But you can, this is 1/2 centimeter. If you want, you can make these bands, 1 centimeter, 2 centimeters. I mean, it really depends on, again, the aesthetic that you're going for. Once you have your initial pass, you obviously have the stability, because that's what the standard book looks like. And you can vary these. And I mean, you can stop a color at any given time. So maybe the first two or 3 bands are one color, the middle couple bands are another, and the third set are color again. So it's just a matter of experimenting at that point. So I'm going to just keep sewing this. Like I said, this right now is we've reached the rinse and repeat stage. We're just going to keep going back and forth. stop every once in a while and check, because sometimes I'll get out of rhythm and I'll end up spanning more space than I should. Go back and fix my mistake. That's usually because I'm watching the program and paying attention to it instead of what my hands are doing. And then the other thing is, this is not my normal sewing position. I'm doing this for the camera. That's an interesting little strain on the body that it's not used to. All right, let's get rid of this. Okay, so that's the second one done. Moving on to the third. That might be too ambitious. End up tangling.
Can I just ask a question about the wax thread?
Yeah, what
Well, it's not my favorite thing in the world. I guess the stuff I have is very heavily waxed, and I find it irritating and a little bit fiddly. No, keep working while you're doing it. Sorry.
Oh.
I'll talk while you're going.
yeah.
But I guess in my head, I kind of think about, oh, gee, I bring my books with me everywhere. Beach, hot car. Is it going to leave like a shadow or like a ghost if it kind of gets a bit melty in there? And like, is it going to stain the covers if you're in a situation where it's not temperature regulated and it's exposed to heat and such, or cold and it heats up and cools down and such? Like, have you found any kind of blooming issues on your books with waxed thread?
No, I have not encountered that, though it's an interesting question. This particular thread is not waxed. This cotton, I'm sorry, this is just an Irish linen thread.
Right.
And now, if I were sewing a text block, I would wax my thread. I don't like the aesthetic that yeah, for me, it's more of an aesthetic. I find that if I take this same thread and wax it, or use a wax thread, there's always this white haze to it. It just doesn't ever quite look as pretty as the plain thread.
Agreed.
But I understand that, if you're making a text block, you want to put the wax on it. It helps your sewing. It helps the longevity of the thread as far as use. But yeah, for this kind of thing where it's primarily a cosmetic, I don't use wax thread. I use it straight off the spool. And oh, that camera, sorry. And yeah, I just don't use wax thread for that kind of thing. So to answer your question, I have not come across that, but I don't make enough books with wax thread exposed that it would be something that I'd be aware of. If that makes sense.
It does. Thanks.
It's a really good question, though. So I run a Facebook group called it's Esoterics of Bookbinding. A friend of mine out in Seattle and I co-administrate it. Administrate it. and I think I might have to pose that question on that group. You should, if you're on Facebook, go ahead and join it. Self-promotion is good there. Show your work, ask questions, share knowledge, all of that good stuff. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see what other people, what their experiences are. A lot of the books, a lot of the work that I do is more of a traditional bookbinding, uh, whether it's new, making like a quarter or half bound leather, or restoring a book. So I don't really do a lot of this. I mean, I make some for market because people come into my tent, and then I can start talking to them about their personal libraries or whatever. It gives me an in. Make sure I do that right.
You're using an 18.3, is that correct? On that,
Right now, yes.
do you ever find that the linen thread stretches in any sort of way, or there's, and what about tension? You don't want it too tight, right?
You want this fairly snug. If you go too loose, then the case is just wobbly. I find that, like I said, if you leave just enough space for your needle to pass through, you don't want it tight, but you want it to have some friction. You want to be able to feel it going through. That you keep it snug like that, and everything is, yeah. But you don't want to, like, you don't have to ream on it or anything. Just keeping it taut, I guess, would be the correct term. Why? Okay. So I'm talking, and I did it. I made a
Extra cut.
mistake. So I got to go back up. Okay, there we go. What did I just do? Arr. Now I got everything really bummed up. This is the fun part of live. You get to see all the mistakes as well. What did I do? All right, now we're back where we should be. Good argument for fewer sewing stations. Take less time. Okay, we're past the halfway point. Nice thing about how this is set up is it'll tell you if you've made a mistake in each sewing station. Because if you're not able to drop down to the next hole, the right spot, becomes painfully obvious. You need to go back and figure out where you broke your pattern. So you'll find that with this particular binding, you're best off to use a plain or plainish unpatterned paper. If you get a paper or a cloth cover that's too busy, you'll lose you'll lose your sewing pattern, and that's what makes this so striking. If this was a lighter cover, the contrast wouldn't be there. And if it was too busy, you might lose the sewing in it. And this particular type of binding really is to show off the sewing, I think. So I tend to use a lighter covering for the case with a darker thread, or vice versa, a darker covering with a lighter thread. That way it becomes more evident. I leave the fancy covers for other books. Like, I don't know that I would use a marbled paper for this style. But I mean, that's a personal aesthetic choice. So we're getting towards the end here. Need to finish this off. All right, so all you're going to do to finish this off, you're going to make sure everything's snug, it's in place, and you're just going to pass underneath and do a little knot. And I try and keep my knot as close to that hole as possible. That way it doesn't really show up. And so I'm going to do a second one to really lock that in. And I'm going to trim this off. Oh, sewn. So that's what the inside of your case is going to look like. And this is what your outside. Now you can move these around a little bit to get, if you want that obvious chevron look. And a couple of these looks like I overlapped or missed. This one here, I went on the wrong side. Both of them are on the bottom side of this instead of alternating like that one. Okay, well, I'm not going to cry about that right now. So at this point, you take your tape off. In my case, I'm going to do it very gently so it doesn't tear my Bugra paper. See, it started taking it right there. Nice. Little repair, no one will ever know it was there. Okay. So I'm going to take a moment and position these a little. And the reason I'm doing this now is I'm going to put some glue on the threads on the inside. Now there's the history of this binding is a little interesting where, and I don't have the dates, and the only name I know is Angoya, but apparently this is her baby. Now I've heard that she invented it, and then I've heard from other sources that the crisscross binding existed and she came up with her own variation of it. And I'm not 100% sure which story is accurate. I know she has a book. I have not read it yet. So from what I'm understanding, her variation is she added gluing down the threads. So we're going to do that. Heavy of a brush. I'm just going to kind of make some passes, try and get some of the glue underneath it. I don't know how necessary this is because we're going to put a paste down end paper on here. And I would think that the glue from that would do the job. And I just take the little tails and I glue them down in line with everything else. So when we do put the paper over it, it completes a nice little pattern. Okay. Now, I don't know. And all I'm doing is I'm just doing a very light rolling it one way, rolling it the other way. It'll get glue underneath it. I'm assuming that'll be enough to keep it from, the reasoning is supposed to be to keep it from moving. Now, the other part of this is Anne would put this now in the press and press the threads into the boards. I'm not going to do that. One, to leave it in there long enough for the glue to dry and everything. So I would use some sort of release layer, either a remade or wax paper or something over this. Then I'd put it between two cotton blotters. I'd put it between boards in the press and then press it if that's what you want to do. I don't want to do it because I find that it also flattens these into the boards and I don't like them flattened in. Now, again, that is another personal aesthetic choice. So I've given you verbally what Anne Goy says to do. And now I just told you what I'm going to do because that's how I'm doing this. And yeah. Okay, so the next step is we are going to put in the protective, I don't even know what the right term is. We're going to make these protected threads by adding that grab another piece. 1 second. Okay. So I'm going to use a contrasting, I'm sticking with the blue and burgundy theme. So I'm going to cut a strip and I want it to be a little bit 2 millimeters roughly more narrow than the spine itself. So I'm going to use a spine piece. And my knife. And I'm going to mark thickness of my spine piece. Now you can measure it a couple millimeters thinner. I'm just going to eyeball it and say that's roughly 2 millimeters thinner. Okay, there's one. I'm going to go ahead and do a second one. I know that's not going to be enough. Now these strips can really be made of anything. I typically will use whatever cover material I'm using. So this is a Cotton book cloth, and that's what I use to do the thread protectors. Because I use the Bugra paper on the outside, that's what I have handy. So I'm just going to use the Bugra paper. Okay, so let's bring this guy back. So I mentioned using the spatula or the micro spatula, and this is where it's going to come in handy. So I'm going to take my strip of cover material and I'm going to make a little point for it. And all I'm going to do is slide it underneath the first two, and it went without help. Nice. The first two sewing stations. And so it should look like that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to, right at the first thread, fold it without putting tension on that thread. And I'm going to trim this just a little bit without cutting my and then I'm going to bring this over. And again, I want to take it to the thread, but not putting tension on it. And then I'm going to trim this just shy of the end. And you should have something that looks like that. So I'm going to repeat that process a few times. So those are the first two sewing stations. To do the next two. See, this is where having that spatula might come in handy. So because of the number of sewing stations or threads, I'm going to skip the middle one because it's going to be solitary. Sure why I thought I need a second strip for this. So what you should have at this point now is 4 stations of protected threads. Now, attach. To make sure I didn't get any glue underneath there. It needs to be free because your needle is literally going to go underneath each of these sections like this. So it's like sewing on tapes. That's what you're going to sew into. So we now have 4 sewing stations with the protected threads. All right, at this point, we are going to do the last part of the cover, and that is the paste down. I guess it doesn't matter if you do the paste down now or after you put the text block in. I just feel process wise, it just makes more sense to do the paste down now. I've got a couple scrap pieces of the Bugra here that are going to be, yeah. Okay. So what you would do normally is you would measure your text block. Now this Bugra paper is just a hair shy of the height and the width. I'm going to run with it for time's sake because they're sitting here. What I would do is I would have the Bugra cut to the same size as the text block, and that's what I would use. But I think for this example, I'm comfortable enough using this as it is. And we're going to move forward with that. So I'm going to I haven't changed camera in a while. Give you a different view. I think everyone's glued up end paper before. Should grab the bigger brush. All right, there we go. The one drawback to the Bugra is it absorbs moisture like crazy. So you don't want to take your time with it. Nice and squared up, get the gunk off me. Now, if you had put the case in the press, the reasoning behind it, and I'll show you in a second. The threads deliberately make them a little bit more pronounced. So I don't know how the lighting is, but if you can see the texture, you can see the threads here. So I'll move it around a little bit. And if you put it in the press, that would be less noticeable. The other thing the Bugra is unforgiving when it comes to glue. You get a little bit of glue on it and you're going to know it. You'll see it. Okay, so eyeballing this up. Nice and square. Make sure my fingers are clean. Sure that paper's nice and down. Okay. We have successfully completed less drying the case. There we go. There, centered it. Fingerprints and all. All right. So I'm going to sit this over here to dry for a little bit. And we're going to move on to the text block. We're in the home stretch. Case away, and I need the case. Arr. Come back here. Okay, so I've pre-cut this card to the size, the height of my text block. The reason I did that is I'm going to come in here, and I probably should have found a lighter card. Give me. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this centered. Now I'm going to make a mark at the top and bottom of these sewing stations. This is how I'm going to punch my holes. See these. All right. I already know that there's more space on the bottom than there is on the top of this because of the way I measured it. So there's definitely going to be a top and a bottom to my signature, and I want to keep that same, but it'll be obvious when I go to sew it, which is which. Is. There we go. All right, so if you have a sewing cradle, you can do it there. I have one, I don't like it. I know the guy, Daryl at DOS Bookbinding, he puts a little hook on the edge of this, so his configuration's a little bit different. I just lined it up with the top of the page. If I was doing a particularly nice book, I might put the hook on it to guarantee that I'm dead on. You want to come in at an angle that gets you through the center of the spine, not starting at the center and coming out the side somewhere. I was hoping to make these demos about 2 hours, but I've been consistently running at just over 3, which it seems that this is going to be par for the course. That's okay. So I realized that I had mentioned Bernard Middleton's books, and I'd also mentioned learning from DVDs by it was originally called Bookbinder's Workshop. It was when Michael Chrisman owned it, and he of course starred in them. Michael Chrisman is my bookbinding master that I learned from, and he actually at one point came and lived with me for 8 months, and we did an intensive study on 14th and 15th century bindings. I'm in the process of binding my own large format Gutenberg Bible facsimile. I came into possession of high resolution scans of the 2-volume set. And basically it was scans of the 1961 Cooper Square edition. And they went out of business because of the war at the time and never really made it off the ground. But that's kind of a little bit more of my my particular background as far as my education on the bookbinding. Okay. So we now have a nicely punched, I don't know how well you can see it, text block, book block, in this case, because there's no text. So in theory, bring this back down. Get my glasses back. I'm gonna line this up, make sure everything's pretty. Yay! We're ready to sew. For the sewing, again, I don't know that there's a particular size. This is a number 35 3-ply Coats Bugra. Okay. And yeah, typically 3 arm lengths is what I start with whenever I'm sewing a book in general. I find if I get too much longer than that, I end up with tangles, other issues. And so let's thread up the needle. You're going to want to use a curved needle. I know that Daryl over at DOS Bookbinding hates them, probably for the same reason I do. They flip around in my fingers, and I have fairly large hands, and they flip around too much on me. So he starts off with a straight needle and then switches to the curved needle. I just start with the curved needle because it just seems ridiculous to switch to me. You can wax it. Let's see if I got a piece of wax handy. My wax with dog and cat hair, because they can't leave it alone. The joys of the cats is just about every tool makes it to the floor if I don't manage to put it away every night, which I don't. Three passes is typically good. Okay. Sewing. All right. So when you start this, you're not going to start one. There's no kettle stitch. I guess we should talk about that. When you do typical bookbinding, you'll usually have kettle stitch the head and tail, and you have your sewing stations on tapes, assuming that you're using supports in the middle. This doesn't have it. You'll notice when I marked this, I only marked around the protected sewing stations. So when you start this, you're not going to start with a kettle stitch where you tie off. You're going to start at the second hole. You're going to go the opposite direction than is intuitive. You're going to come in through, in this case, we'll call it the head hole. And then you're going to come back out the second hole and continue along like you normally would. We'll demonstrate that in a second. And so as you get to the head and the tail, you're going to play this game of the second hole first and using that instead of the kettle stitch. And I know that didn't make a lot of sense verbally, so hopefully it does make sense visually. So as we go through this, once I get this first pass done, we'll pause. If anyone has any questions, we'll address it at that point, and then we'll move forward. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come from the inside, and I'm going to come out the second hole. So the first hole is here. I'm coming out this second hole. And I got one more thing I got to show you. So on this end, see if I can remember how to do this. I'm going to tie. This is always a bugger. Go around twice. So I'm tying a slip knot, and I'm at some point going to put a video out with diagrams of various bookbinding knots. And let's see if I did it right this time. Yay! Okay, I got it. So this will come in handy in a minute. So just going to leave that right there. So yeah, learning to do a slip knot, probably a good idea. So I'm going to leave myself a few inches on the inside with that knot. Okay, so we came out the second hole. I'm going to go back towards the head underneath that protected sewing station. So I'm going to bring the thread through there. Pull, yeah, and I'm going to pull on that. All right. Now I'm going to go back in through the top hole. I'm going to get my signature positioned where it should be. And in this case, I'm going to use a little weight. And what I want to do is I'm going to bring my thread through that slip knot that I made at the second hole. And I'm going to snug it up. I don't want to pull too tight, but there. And so now I can go back out the top hole. And I can sew all along as you would normally do. So I'm still going to go back through my protected threads. sew it like I normally would a sewing station. There we go. Okay, so when you get to the last sewing station, you're gonna kind of do an counterintuitive move. So you're gonna go all the way to the end like you normally would, but instead of a kettle stitch, you're gonna go back in all of your folios. You're gonna knot up. Of course you are. Okay, so I've done this a couple different ways in the past. I've come up and knotted this, and you can if you want. In this case, all I'm going to do is I'm going to go back out that second hole. That knotting up. Make sure everything's snug. I'm going to come out this hole, and boom. So now you are poised for your next signature and going in through the second hole. Like that. And that allows you to come out the tail hole. Now you can sew all along. Like you normally would. So it's going to be a lot of back and forth now, and you want to end up. Okay, this thread is really starting to frustrate me. Okay, so I'm going to pause here because I realized that was probably a little confusing. Did that make sense? How starting and using the second hole versus a kettle stitch and going the opposite direction to be able to come back so you can sew along? Okay, I see head nodding. Yay. Okay. I'm going to continue. So this is one of those where you're going to have to get used to keeping the right tension. Just like sewing along in a regular book, you want it fairly snug, but you don't want it super tight either. The more signatures you get on, the more critical having a curved needle is going to be. The first few, it's not too bad. You can probably get away with a straight needle. You get halfway, I change your mind. Now, usually when I sew these, I'll have some sort of support to help hold that spine up. And this is why it was looking so easy with the needle. You want to be able to keep that down, but if you have it flat, you're going to end up with a lot of play. If while you're doing this, you pull and loosen up some threads in the signature, don't worry about it. This particular style makes it really easy to pull everything back. Okay, so I made it back to the head. I'm going to pull that nice and snug, and I'm going to go back out that second hole. That sets us up for the next signature. Good, so just repeating, got to the end. Now I'm gonna come back out that second hole. Snug everybody back up again. And we're gonna go back in through the second hole. And then out through the first hole, so we can sew along. And honestly, I mean, this is the trickiest part of the entire process is that whole second hole thing. And once you've got that, the rest is just time. Between each signature, I do a little press down in the spine, kind of like using a beat down stick. Because the especially this paper when it folds, got a lot of spring to it, so it wants to open back up. Had we left it in the press overnight, that would have taken a little bit of that out. But even after it's pressed, this paper really wants to open back up. Like I said, it's okay if you loosen stuff up a bit as you're sewing. The big takeaway is you want to snug everything up before you go out or before you cinch going out that second hole. Once you lock in your next section, kind of a little bit difficult to tighten it up. So usually before I go and pull this all the way through, I'll tighten everything up. Okay, four more signatures. Have a complete book. When you start getting towards the last few signatures, the amount of swell will make it, you're gonna wanna push these down. You're not gonna be able to see your protected tapes. Your very last one, you'll need to coax your thread to make sure it's behind the protected material, whether it's a cloth or paper, because the cloth or paper is slightly thinner than the book itself or the spine itself, and it'll want to pop up on top. So when you do your final pass, you'll have to make that adjustment, which you'll see me do in a minute. All right, second to last signature. Anybody fall asleep yet?
Nope, still here.
Ricky, draw the thread. Okay. Ooh, disaster averted. Okay, here we are, final signature. And this is the one, like I said, you're gonna want to help guide the thread. We're right at the top edge of where the protective wraps are on the case threads. All right, coming up on the big finish. Okay. So the big finish on this. Let's come up through the top. Instead of going back out the second hole, you're just gonna tie it off right here. Let's see, pretty loose. There we go. I'm gonna put another one in just for good measure. And voila. There is 3 hours of our lives. That really wants to spring back open. Yeah, this paper really should have been pressed overnight. Or maybe I got. I don't know if you can see this. The spine could have been just a hair wider, maybe another millimeter, because the swell is right there. So that's the issue that I'm having with it closing. I thought maybe if I coaxed the threads down, but it's well, eh. Okay. So lesson there is when I first started off and I put pressure on there and I was trying to simulate, okay, book's closed, but I need swell, so I didn't want to push too hard. Probably could have pushed a hair harder. But I mean, the book, it stays closed, flat, just wants to spring open on the table. Okay. If you were to, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was wondering, sometimes, I know it's tricky, but maybe before you put the next signature on, maybe in this case, using a bone folder to squish it down a bit. I mean, you didn't have the,
Sure, like a beat down stick, but
Yeah.
and I was using my fingers to do that.
Yeah.
But this paper, I mean, I love it. But it's got a lot of spring, and it really, when you fold it, I mean, this has been folded and creased, and it's still not really a sharp edge. It wants to stay round.
Mm.
Yeah, had I just made the spine a millimeter wider, it probably would have been just fine. So like one's like, well, even that one wants to pop open, but it's almost identical. Huh.
Mm.
Okay, so we covered. I'm just gonna look and see if. Well, I didn't save one. All right, if. Okay, well, we'll just use this. If the protective tapes weren't there, and there's what they refer to as the traditional method, not the Angoy, what you'd end up doing is you would decide, okay, this one is my sewing station, and instead of sewing on the tapes, you would literally just sew to an individual thread. And I did that for the longest time. That's how I originally learned how to do it. I didn't realize there was an Angoy method. And when I first started doing it, it just made, I don't know why I would do it differently. It just seemed structurally more sound. It would make a better book. And it honestly, out of the entire process, what did it take? 5 minutes to do? So to not do it just seems ridiculous to me. I think you end up with a much better book. Where like this one here, this was literally sewn on these 3 stations, and that was it. So that's what it was sewn to. And I have other ones somewhere where I've sewn, but since they're together, you're not gonna be able to see what I did anyway. Okay. Now that my bench is a mess, we have a finished book. You guys have any final questions before we move off?
I'll just show you this really quickly. This is the Belgian binding, you can't see necessarily the threads. Oh, there they are. You see them. And I
Yep.
used, this is an old library book that I repurposed. And then I covered the edges. But I did that with the sewing into the threads, and it's still pretty stable.
How many sewing stations did you use?
I have 8. I have 8. So the only thing I find is maybe the cover is a bit too tight. It does that little doohickey thing, that nice to keep it flat, but there is a bit of, yeah. But yeah, it's not bad. Yeah, but it's one less step, but I like the idea of the flaps that will give it a bit more stability. And I did see it. Where did I see? I guess I thought I saw it on Daryl's
Yeah, he
Yeah.
does all
I think
3
he does
versions.
both.
The traditional one, he has the Angoy one, and he has, I
Mhm.
think he has, I haven't checked to see, but I'm pretty sure this is the 3rd variation that he does.
Yeah, I think he did
And-
have 3.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I have no questions. Or no.
Okay.
No questions from me either. That was really informative. Thanks very much.
Well, yeah, I'm glad you got something out of this. And, if you guys, if there's a particular structure that you're interested in, if you let me know, I can build a demo or even a workshop around it. Workshops, I'm not huge on online workshops because I have to put kits together and mail them out. We had a space last year, big, large studio space. I'm back in my house now because it didn't work out. And I really enjoyed the workshops that we had in person. But doing the demos like this, where I just walk through the process and then publish the video for you, and there'll be, when I send you the link in a day or two, you'll have the video, you'll have any of the notes that I have as far as like the history of the style, and I'll send you there'll be a list of materials and where I purchased them, and a list of tools. And sometimes it's you find cool stuff. Like I stumbled upon cave paper a few weeks ago. Didn't know the stuff existed, and I got some in, and I guess it would be a few weeks ago now, and just love the stuff. And I'm plotting a project for it. I haven't quite figured out something that warrants it, but the paper is magnificent, and I wouldn't have discovered it had someone else not used it in one of their processes and said, "Hey, check this out." So, okay, I don't have anything else. Thank you. Look for an email by Monday night at the latest. I'll send out all this information, and yeah, let me know if there's something else that you want to see, and I think that's it.
Awesome. Thanks very much.
Thanks. Sarah, Chris, thank you. The other lady signed off already, so have a great day. Thank you.
You too. Bye now.
Bye-bye.